Now, the three-day ASEAN Summit is presently underway in Cambodia, and this is the first in-person meeting of the grouping since the COVID-19 pandemic. And this is day 2 of the summit that began on Friday, and the leaders of China, Japan and South Korea held talks with the Southeast Asian nations. Now, the bloc earlier had held talks with the Chinese premier as well.
我们正在磋商 COC， 在磋商过程当中，我们照顾各方的关切，但是也坚决地维护和促进国际法，尊重包括联合国海洋法公约在内的国际法，支持依据包括公约和南海各方行为宣言在内的国际法原则，来妥善处理南海出现的一些问题。
Meanwhile, South Korea's President Yoon Suk-yeol has said that the unilateral attempts to change the status quo in the Asian region by force are simply not acceptable. Yoon further said that he will strengthen the shared economic prosperity based on an open and a fair order.
인도태평양 지역의 평화와 안정은 우리의 생존과 번영에 직결됩니다.
And the 10-nation bloc also faces a multitude of different issues, including the escalating crisis in Myanmar. And during day 1 of the summit, the Southeast Asian heads of governments issued a warning to Myanmar to make some measurable progress on a peace plan or to risk being barred from the bloc's meetings. And the Southeast Asian leaders also agreed to engage Myanmar's opposition groups as well. The bloc leaders are now seeking ways to quell the country's escalating bloodshed, which has seen thousands get killed in clashes since last year's coup. The political, social and economic chaos has gripped Myanmar since the military overthrew the elected government of the controversial civilian leader Aung San Suu Kyi last year. And the American President Joe Biden has also arrived in Cambodia, where he'll be meeting with the Asian heads of states and will discuss a whole host of different issues, including Myanmar, China and North Korea. And on the sidelines of the ASEAN Summit, Ukraine's Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba held a press briefing where he called on the Southeast Asian nations to take all measures possible to ensure that Russia did not play hunger games. Now, regarding the shipment of Ukrainian grain to the global market, he insisted that it is important that the world should in fact come forth and make it abundantly clear to the Russians as to what it expects of it. The ASEAN leaders have also agreed in principle to admit Timor-Leste as its 11th member. All right, now to give us more updates in terms of what's exactly unfolding at ASEAN at this moment, we're being joined in by WION Siddhant, who's joining us live from Bali. Siddhant, this of course is a crucial ASEAN summit. Tell us more as to what is on the agenda.
Well, yes, the ASEAN meetings are underway in Cambodia, and we know that it's time for summit season in Asian region, because the next big summit will be the G20 summit. But if we look at what's happening in Cambodia, there are two important things happening. How basically is their engagement with China? While China has sent its premier, we know that there are engagements with the ASEAN grouping. In fact, ASEAN all day today has been having summit level meeting with its sectoral partners, including with India as well. But the larger emphasis by the ASEAN is that we need to have a stability in the region. The region have been going through a lot of events which of course are dangerous to the stability of the region. We saw earlier this year the Taiwan Strait crisis, and of course And aggressive China is a worry for countries in the region, whether it's Tokyo or whether it's New Delhi. In fact, one of the key outcomes of today's meetings in Cambodia has been the meeting between ASEAN and India. India has sent its vice president, and India ensured that the commonality in terms of the vision is something that it emphasized, and it called for deeper strategic engagement with the ASEAN grouping. While, of course, the grouping has its own set of worries, Myanmar is one. We saw on Friday, the first day of the start of the several meetings, in which there was a separate document talking about the concerns ASEAN has over Myanmar not implementing the 5-point agenda, but also clearly telling the military junta, drawing the red line that you need to implement these 5-point initiatives or agenda that were proposed by the grouping after that coup that happened.
Now, Siddhant, the fact that the turmoil in Myanmar has continued is that, for many years now, the ASEAN nations have been asking Myanmar to get things in order within itself, because it is causing a huge refugee crisis. Because every time there is turmoil within Myanmar, it sparks a refugee crisis which impacts these other nations. Is there something that the ASEAN nations can actually do to ensure that the military junta in Myanmar, which is in control of the nation at this moment, actually implements and progresses towards some kind of a peace plan and makes its transition towards a democracy?
Well, ASEAN as a grouping wants Myanmar and, of course, the military junta to take action with that 5-point agenda. But ASEAN also does not want to have an isolated Myanmar. That, of course, ASEAN perhaps sees as a bigger challenge. So it is having a certain level of practical engagement with the military leadership that came after the coup. But, of course, it is worried about the opposition leadership, what's happening with them. There hasn't been any access to the opposition leader, including, of course, Aung San Suu Kyi, and that, of course, remains the big worry. And it's just not the ASEAN grouping, it's also the other countries in the region. In fact, India just last week emphasized on early implementation of the 5-point agenda by the ASEAN grouping, and also said that Myanmar should get back to its democratic way. That is something that India has been supporting for. But for India, it's another difficulty, or perhaps situation. India shares a long border, both maritime and the land border, and the bigger worry for India is that it would not like to see insurgent groups regrouping in the country. That poses threat to India's northeast.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed, Siddhant Sibal, for joining us and getting us all those updates there. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.